Hello, my name is Lisa Peel. I'm doing my PowerPoint presentation on labor battles in the Gilded Age. In this presentation, I will be discussing about how the late 1800s, the U.S. industrial economy grew when it conflicted between the workers and factory owners and sometimes led to violence. Each slide is reference to the pathway of union labor, and it begins with the year 1869 and it goes all the way to the year 1959. The Knights of Labor is abbreviated KOL. The secret society in 1869 was founded by Uriah S. Stevens. He began in Philadelphia until 1882. He was the first major labor organization in the U.S. The Knight organized unskilled and skilled workers campaign for an 8-hour workday. The Knight's membership collapsed following the 1886 Haymarket Square riot in Chicago. By 1886, the American Federation of Labor, which is abbreviated AFL, an alliance of skilled workers' trade unions, was growing. The Haymarket Square riot, like I said, took place on May the 4th, 1886 at the McCormick Reefer Works. The workers were hoping to gain a shorter workday. They used police to protect them from strikebreakers, and then a scuffle broke out. Someone threw a bomb at the police in the Chicago Haymarket Square. There was at least 8 people that died as a result of the violence that day. They arrested 8 radical labor activists and convicted in connection with the bombing. American Federation of Labor, AFL, was in 1886, which was led by Samuel Gomer, who was the first and longest serving president of the AFL. He was a member of the KOL as well until he became sick of the KOL leadership. The AFL became the largest and most influential labor federation in the world. He maintained a focused view on trade unionism. And he also was believing that the union should concentrate more on bargaining agreements. Sherman Antitrust Act was in 1890, founded by U.S. Senator John Sherman of Ohio, who was an expert on the regulation. In 1908, the U.S. Superior Court decided to apply the Act of Labor Organization in the landmark decision. Homestead strike was founded by Andrew Carnegie on July 6, 1892 at the Carnegie Steel Company in Homestead, Pennsylvania. It resulted in a gun battle between unionized steel workers and a group of men hired by the company to break the strike. The steel workers lost the strike. Strike and strike breaking happened on June the 29th, 1892 by Henry Clay Frick, who was the manager of the Homestead Steel Workers. He motivated to break the union of skilled steel workers when the AA members proceeded to strike the mill. Frick hired men from Perkington Detective Agency who are actually armed men seeking to push past striking workers and reopen the steel works. The state government sided with the owners and the unions had been defeated again. George Pullman was an engineer who designed a popular railroad sleeping car. By the late 1860s, he had his first dining car. George did not sell the rail cars. He rented them to the railroad with complete staff. He built a company townhouse outside of Chicago. He had 12,000 workers who built the sleeping cars, and they lived. Pullman cut the workers' wages without reducing rent. With that being the case, the workers began to strike. The Pullman strike happened on May the 11th, 1894. It started outside of Chicago at the Pullman Sleeping Car Manufacturing Company. It grew fast into the National Railroad strike, including the American Railway Union. Eugene V. Debs led the nationwide railroad strike of the American Railway Union. He made a strategy of not operating any trains that included a Pullman sleeping car. The practice was to cut these cars from the train and move them to the side of the tracks. If any of the employees were terminated for this action, then the entire crew would quit, leaving the train unoperated. Eugene's goal was to make the ones employed in the 27 states intended to make railroad carriers put pressure on Pullman to agree with the ARUS bargaining positions. Gene and other strike leaders were in prison. When they refused to abide by the court order, they decided to call off the strike. U.S. mail delivered on company trains in Chicago on July the 7th, 1894. The American Railway Union asked for support from the U.S. President Grover Cleveland. The employees burned at least 700 railroad cars. They were obstructing delivery of the United States mail. Cleveland sent troops to Chicago to protect the U.S. mail against the Union. The government had sided with employers in the labor management dispute. The anthracite coal strike was in 1902 when President Teddy Roosevelt threatened coal mine owners. He told them if they did not bargain in good faith with the coal workers union, that the federal government would take over control of the mines. The owners quickly responded to his demand, and the strike was settled. Great Depression was with President Franklin Roosevelt. He signed the Wagner Labor Relations Act. In 1932 was to end the long economic depression. The Wagner Act was established federal guidelines for allowing unions to organize and establish the National Labor Relations Board, which is NLRBA. He promised Americans a New Deal. In 1947, Congress amended the Wagner Act with the Taft-Hartley Act, which restricts the power of labor unions. But before the Taft-Hartley Act, in 1936, there was an anti-broker law that came. Now, the Taft-Hartley Act was in 1947. It was sponsored by U.S. Senator Robert A. Taft and Representative Fred A. Hartley. That's how it got its name, Taft-Hartley Act. It was the first major revision to the Wagner Act. The act was to protect employees' rights from these unfair practices by unions. The act also required unions to take an oath. The oath stated that they were not communists. Although many people tried to appeal the act, the Taft-Hartley Act stayed in effect until 1959, when the Landrum-Griffin Act amended some of the features. Landrum-Griffin Act in 1959, when President Dwight Eisenhower signed into law the new Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act. This act amended the Taft-Hartley It's named after two people, Representative Philip M. Landrum of Georgia and Senator Robert P. Griffin of Michigan. The act was to prevent union corruption and also to guarantee union members that the unions will be run equally. Reference page. I got my information from a couple of places. First, my book, Labor Relation Process, the 11th edition. The websites I used was aflci.org, ushistory.com, and pictures from Google.